Lonely rancher helped a native woman crying in the rain and told her, "You're safe." The rancher lived a life that most people could not imagine. His name was Thomas, and for as long as anyone in the nearby town could remember, he had been alone on his wide-open ranch. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, rolling hills dotted with oak trees, and a river that cut through the property like a silver ribbon. Thomas moved across it all, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and making sure everything was in order. It was hard work, tiring work, but it was honest, and it was the life he knew. Every morning Thomas would rise before the sun, letting the chill of the early air wake him fully. The sound of birds beginning their songs was a small comfort, a reminder that even in solitude, life continued. He would walk out to the barn feeding the horses and cattle, ensuring that each animal had enough food and water. There was a rhythm to the work, a pattern that gave his life structure, and though it was lonely, it also gave him purpose. Sometimes he thought about having someone to share his days with, but the thought never lingered long. Life on the ranch required independence, and Thomas had grown accustomed to relying on only himself. Despite the solitude, Thomas was not a man without feelings. The years had carved lines into his face, and the harsh sun had bronzed his skin, but his eyes were soft, carrying the quiet warmth of someone who cared deeply, even if that care had few outlets. He was known in town as quiet and reserved, sometimes distant, but never unkind. If someone stopped by needing help with a broken fence or a sick animal, he would lend a hand without hesitation. Yet he rarely sought human company, preferring the quiet companionship of the land and the animals he tended. On this particular day, the sky was heavy with clouds that promised rain. The wind whipped across the hills, bending the tall grass, and the first drops began to fall before Thomas had finished his morning chores. He did not mind the rain. It was part of life on the ranch. But there was something different about this storm. It felt heavier somehow, almost as if it carried a weight that matched the emptiness Thomas sometimes felt in his own heart. He finished feeding the animals quickly and moved toward the barn, seeking shelter from the downpour. As he walked, Thomas noticed something unusual in the distance. At first he thought it was a shadow, a trick of the wind and rain, but as he looked closer, he realized it was a person, a woman, standing alone in the open field, soaked to the skin, her body trembling as though the cold had seeped into her very bones. She was crying, though the rain masked the sound. Thomas's first instinct was to call out to her, but he hesitated. He had seen travelers lost in the fields before, people who wandered onto his land by mistake. But something about this woman made him pause. There was a fragility, a fear in her posture that tugged at his heart. Without thinking much about it, Thomas walked toward her. The rain soaked him instantly, drenching his coat and making his boots slippery in the mud, but he did not care. When he was only a few steps away, he could see her face clearly. Her hair, dark and wet, clung to her cheeks, and her eyes, wide with fear and sorrow, met his for the briefest moment before she looked away again. She did not speak, did not move, only let the rain wash over her as though it could carry away her pain. Thomas approached slowly, speaking in a calm voice. "Hey, are you all right?" he called, not wanting to startle her. She flinched, stepping back slightly, but he could see that she did not run. That gave him hope. He took another step closer, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "You don't have to be out here in the rain by yourself. Come with me. You'll be safe." At first, the woman hesitated. Thomas could see the fear in her eyes, the hesitation born from a world that had not always been kind to her. Yet something in his voice, gentle and steady, gave her a small spark of trust. Slowly, she nodded, allowing him to guide her toward the warmth of the ranch house. Every step they took was cautious, the mud slippery under their feet. But Thomas did not rush her. He simply offered the promise of safety, and that was enough. Inside the cabin, Thomas moved quickly to make her comfortable. He offered her a blanket, which she accepted reluctantly, and a chair near the fireplace, where the warmth began to chase away the cold that had soaked her bones. Thomas went to the kitchen and prepared a cup of tea, the steam rising in the dim light of the small room. He returned it to her carefully, placing it on the table before her. She took it with trembling hands, the warmth of the cup a small comfort against the chill that still lingered in her body. For a while, they sat in silence. The rain continued to fall outside, tapping against the windows. But inside, there was only quiet, broken occasionally by the soft sound of her sipping tea. Thomas did not press her to speak. He understood that sometimes words were not necessary. Sometimes just being present, offering shelter and warmth, was enough. He could see the relief slowly washing over her, even if she did not yet smile. As the storm outside raged, Thomas thought about how strange life could be. Here he was, a man who had lived in solitude for years, suddenly sharing his home with a stranger who needed him. And yet, it felt right. It felt as though this small act of kindness was exactly what he had been missing all along. Not companionship in the usual sense, but a connection, brief and fragile, that reminded him of the humanity he shared with others. The woman finally looked up, meeting his eyes with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. Thomas gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe here," he said quietly, the words simple but filled with sincerity. She nodded again, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was enough. In that moment, the rain, the storm, the loneliness, they all seemed to fade away, replaced by something quieter, gentler, something that neither of them had expected but both needed. Outside, the storm continued to pour, but inside the cabin, the fire crackled, the tea warmed their hands, and for the first time that day, both Thomas and the woman felt a fragile sense of peace. It was not a solution to all their problems, nor a cure for the loneliness and hardship each carried, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was all that mattered. Hours passed, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. But Thomas did not mind. He sat quietly watching the woman as she gradually relaxed, her body no longer trembling as violently from the cold. He thought about how life could change in an instant, how a moment of chance, seeing someone in need, could lead to an unexpected connection. It reminded him that even in the loneliest stretches of life, kindness could be a bridge, a way to reach someone when all else seemed lost. As evening fell, the storm slowly began to ease, though the clouds still hung heavy over the hills. Thomas knew that their time together, brief as it might be, had already left an imprint on both their lives. He could not predict the future, nor could he know what challenges awaited the woman once she left his ranch. But for now, in this quiet cabin, surrounded by the smell of wood smoke and the sound of the fire crackling, they had found a moment of safety, of comfort, and of human connection. And sometimes, Thomas thought, that was enough. The rain outside showed no sign of stopping. Thick sheets of water fell from the sky, drumming on the roof and running in little rivers along the uneven ground outside. The storm seemed endless, as if the world itself were washing away. Inside the small cabin, the warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold and wet outside, wrapping the woman in a gentle glow of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. Her name was Ayanna. She had been traveling for hours, carrying a small bundle of belongings wrapped in an old cloth. The journey had not been easy. Her feet were sore, her clothes soaked, and her body shivering from exhaustion. Every step had felt heavier than the last, and yet she had kept going, driven by a hope she could hardly name. When the storm had started, she had no shelter, no home to return to. The open fields and empty roads had seemed endless, and loneliness had wrapped around her like a thick fog. Ayanna had been crying for a while before Thomas found her. The tears had come from fear, from frustration, and from the deep ache of feeling invisible in a world that often ignored her. She had learned to carry pain quietly, to hide it from others, because the world had not always been kind to those who were different or vulnerable. But the storm had broken through her control. The rain mixed with her tears, washing her face, and for the first time in days she had allowed herself to feel the weight of her exhaustion openly. When Thomas approached her in the field, there had been a flash of fear in her eyes. She had been wary of strangers, aware that not everyone offered help with pure intentions. But something about him was different. His voice was calm, gentle, and steady. There was no rush, no pressure, only a quiet invitation that said, "You do not have to face this alone." It was the first moment in a long time that Ayana had felt the possibility of safety, and slowly she had nodded, letting him guide her to the small warmth of the cabin. As she stepped inside, the difference between outside and inside was almost magical. The chill of the storm clung to her, but the fire burned bright, and the wooden floor beneath her feet was solid and dry. She took a small step closer to the warmth, wrapping her arms around herself. The smell of burning wood mixed with the earthy scent of the cabin, something she associated with security, with a place where she could finally breathe. Thomas had moved quietly, giving her space but offering small gestures of comfort. He handed her a blanket and told her to sit by the fire, then went to make tea. Each small act, the soft placement of a chair, the steam rising from a hot cup, the gentle words of reassurance, began to chip away at the fear she had carried. It was not instant, of course. Her eyes still flicked nervously to the door, to the windows, as if expecting danger to arrive at any moment. But with each passing minute her shoulders relaxed, her breathing slowed, and the tremble in her body became less violent. For a long time they sat in silence. Ayana wrapped the blanket around herself, holding the cup of tea as though it were a lifeline. Thomas kept the fire going, occasionally adding a log or adjusting the warmth, but he did not rush her, did not ask questions. He understood that trust could not be forced, and that safety had to be shown, not demanded. He had lived alone for years, and in that quiet understanding, he recognized the small signs that she was beginning to feel secure. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless, but inside, the cabin felt like a small sanctuary. The fire crackled softly, throwing shadows on the walls. Thomas watched Ayana from across the room. She was still tense, still carrying the weight of her troubles, but there was a subtle shift. The shaking had slowed, her gaze was steadier, and her hands were no longer clenching the blanket so tightly. It was a start, and sometimes a start was all that was needed. Finally, after some time, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the sound of relief mingled with lingering fear. I didn't think anyone would help me," she said, her eyes fixed on the cup of tea in her hands. Thomas nodded, understanding without saying much. Words were not necessary yet. The simple act of acknowledging her feelings, of letting her be seen, was enough. I just needed a place to be," she added, her voice trembling slightly. The words were simple, but they carried a depth of pain and vulnerability. She had been on the road for days, leaving behind a life that had become too heavy to bear, escaping troubles she could not face alone. Every step had been an effort, every mile a struggle, and now, in this quiet cabin, the heaviness of her journey began to lift, little by little. Thomas moved closer, sitting in a chair near her, but not too close, respecting her space. "You're safe here," he said again softly. "No one can hurt you here. Just rest." It was the same phrase he had said earlier in the field, but now, inside the warmth, it felt stronger, realer. Ayana nodded, letting herself believe it, letting herself feel it. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. She looked around the cabin, noticing the small details, the worn wooden floors, the simple furniture, the shelves lined with tools and supplies. Everything spoke of a life of quiet diligence, of someone who worked hard and lived honestly. There was no grandeur, no pretension, only sincerity and care. It was a small world, but in it, Ayana found a sense of calm she hadn't known she could feel. Hours passed. The storm outside gradually eased, though the sky remained gray and heavy. The rain slowed to a drizzle, then to drops that fell lazily from the eaves. Inside, Ayana began to relax further, sipping her tea and feeling its warmth spread through her body. She had not realized how tense she had been until the tightness in her muscles began to ease. Thomas watched her quietly, offering small gestures, a gentle smile, a nod of reassurance, a moment of silence to let her feel safe. As the evening deepened, Ayana began to share small pieces of her story. Not all at once, not in a rush, but slowly, as trust grew between them. She spoke of leaving home, of the fears and struggles that had driven her to walk through the rain alone. Thomas listened without judgment, without interrupting, simply acknowledging her words with a soft nod or a quiet murmur of understanding. For someone who had rarely shared their own life with anyone, he understood the importance of listening, of being present. In turn, she asked about him. Thomas spoke sparingly, sharing only what felt comfortable. He spoke of the ranch, of the animals, of the quiet life he had built for himself. He did not speak of loneliness at first, but as the fire crackled and the rain fell outside, he admitted in small ways that living alone was not always easy. There was a comfort in speaking, a relief in sharing even a small part of himself with someone who understood, even if only for a moment. As night fell, the storm finally passed. The sky cleared slightly, revealing the first hints of stars through the clouds. The world outside was damp and glistening, the smell of rain mingling with the earthy scent of the land. Inside, the cabin felt safe and warm, a tiny haven from the storm. Ayanna sat by the fire, wrapped in the blanket, feeling a sense of security she had not known in a long time. Thomas moved quietly about the room, tending to small chores, but always keeping her in sight, ensuring she was comfortable and at ease. By the time sleep approached, the tension in her body had mostly melted away. She felt calm, almost peaceful, a feeling that had been foreign to her for too long. Thomas watched her carefully, noting the small signs of relaxation, the slower breathing, the softening of her eyes, the subtle shift in her posture. It was a quiet triumph, not grand or dramatic, but meaningful in its simplicity. She had survived the storm, and more than that, she had found a moment of safety and care. Before drifting off, Ayanna looked at Thomas and whispered, "Thank you for helping me." The words were soft, barely audible, but they carried the weight of gratitude, relief, and recognition. Thomas nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "Just rest. That's enough." And in that simple exchange, a bond was formed, not one of obligation, but of understanding, of human connection. The night deepened, and the cabin grew quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Outside, the world had been washed clean by the storm, but inside, two strangers had found something far rarer, a sense of trust, a feeling of safety, and the first glimmer of hope that even in the loneliest moments kindness could be found. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the hills, casting a soft golden light across the ranch. The storm had passed, leaving the fields glistening with rainwater and the air smelling fresh and clean. Thomas woke early, as he always did, and stepped outside for a moment to breathe in the crisp morning air. Everything seemed quieter now, peaceful in a way that felt almost sacred after the storm. Inside the cabin, Ayanna was still asleep, curled under the blanket by the fire. Her breathing was steady, calm, and Thomas watched her for a moment, feeling a strange mix of concern and relief. He had spent most of his life alone, used to silence and solitude, but there was something different about caring for someone else, even if only for a brief time. He had realized that morning that kindness was not just about giving, it was about connection, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that connection deeply. Thomas moved quietly around the cabin, preparing a simple breakfast. He heated some water, brewed coffee for himself, and prepared a small meal of eggs and bread. The smells filled the room, comforting and familiar, and soon the aroma reached Ayanna's senses. She stirred from sleep, rubbing her eyes and slowly sitting up. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders, but she quickly wrapped it around herself again. Her hair, still damp from the rain, clung to her face, and her eyes, though tired, were brighter than the day before. "Good morning," Thomas said softly, placing a plate of breakfast on the small table. Ayanna looked up, startled for a moment, but then she smiled. A small, shy smile, the kind that hinted at relief and gratitude. "Morning," she replied, her voice gentle and a little uncertain. She moved closer to the fire, letting the warmth seep into her chilled body, and took the food Thomas had prepared. They ate in a quiet rhythm, the only sounds being the crackle of the fire and the soft clink of utensils on plates. Thomas watched her closely, noticing the way she seemed more at ease than the night before. The tension in her body had lessened, and while her eyes still carried traces of worry, they also held a spark of hope. It was a small thing, but in it, Thomas saw the beginning of trust, something that could not be rushed or forced. After breakfast, Ayana looked out the window at the wet fields, her gaze lingering on the hills and the glistening river. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. Even after the storm, Thomas nodded, appreciating her observation. "The rain makes everything shine," he replied. "It's like the land is new again, refreshed." Ayana smiled faintly, as though the beauty of the world outside reminded her that life, even after hardship, could still be gentle. Thomas knew that Ayana had been through a lot. He could see it in her eyes, in the careful way she moved, in the small pauses she took before speaking. She had carried fear and sorrow with her like a heavy cloak, and though she was beginning to let it slip away, it would take time. He did not push her to speak of her troubles immediately. Instead, he offered comfort through actions rather than words. He showed her the warmth of the cabin, the fire, the food, and the simple steadiness of his presence. As the morning passed, Thomas suggested she take a walk outside. "The rain has stopped," he said. "The fields are safe now." Sometimes a little fresh air helps to clear the mind. Ayana hesitated at first, looking at him uncertainly, but something in his calm tone gave her courage. Slowly she nodded, setting her empty plate aside and moving toward the door. Thomas opened it for her, and the cool, clean air of the post-storm morning filled the cabin. Stepping outside, Ayana felt the soft squish of wet grass beneath her boots. The world was quiet, except for the occasional bird calling to a friend or the distant rush of the river. The storm had left everything damp but vibrant, and she felt a small thrill of relief at being outdoors again. Thomas followed at a careful distance, giving her space but staying close enough to offer support if she needed it. They walked along the edge of the field, where the ground was soft and muddy, the grass glistening with droplets of water. Ayana looked around, noticing details she had not seen before, the way the sunlight reflected on the leaves, the curve of the hills, the way the river sparkled as it wound through the landscape. She breathed deeply, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs, and for the first time in days, she felt almost free. The weight of fear and exhaustion had lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet sense of calm. Thomas spoke gently, asking questions about her journey, not to pry but to show interest. "How far did you walk yesterday?" he asked. Ayana paused, thinking. Farther than I should have," she admitted. I didn't know where else to go." Thomas nodded, understanding. "Sometimes we have to walk through hard things to find the safety we need," he said. His words were simple, but they carried wisdom and empathy, and Ayana felt a small warmth spread through her chest at hearing them. As they walked, Thomas noticed the small gestures she made, the way she brushed her hair back from her face, the careful way she stepped over puddles, the way her eyes lingered on the river. She was cautious, but there was curiosity there too, a slow return to noticing the world around her, instead of only focusing on survival. It was a subtle change, but Thomas recognized it immediately. She was beginning to trust, beginning to feel the possibility of kindness without fear. After some time, they returned to the cabin. Thomas suggested she help with small chores, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, checking the animals in the barn. He did not ask her to work but offered the opportunity to engage in the daily rhythm of life on the ranch. Ayana hesitated, but then agreed, feeling the need to move, to do something tangible. As they walked to the barn together, Thomas explained each task patiently, showing her how to care for the animals with gentle hands and steady attention. Ayana found herself enjoying the work, the simple satisfaction of completing small tasks, of feeling useful. The animals responded to her with quiet acceptance, as if they too could sense the gentleness in her heart. The act of caring for them reminded her of the care she had received from Thomas, how small actions, steady and kind, could make someone feel safe. She began to feel a connection not just to the rancher, but to the life around her, to the land, the animals, and the rhythm of everyday work. Throughout the day, Thomas continued to offer support quietly. He did not push her to talk about her past, but when she chose to speak, he listened with patience. She told him small stories about her life, the people she had known, and the struggles she had faced. Thomas did not judge or offer advice unless she asked. He simply acknowledged her words, giving her the space to express herself freely. In doing so, he allowed her to feel heard, a feeling that she had not experienced in a long time. As evening approached, the sun began to set behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The ranch looked peaceful and serene, the aftermath of the storm leaving everything refreshed and alive. Ayanna and Thomas returned to the cabin, both tired from the day but feeling a quiet contentment. The fire was already burning, crackling softly in the hearth, and the cabin smelled of warm wood and simple meals. Ayanna settled by the fire again, wrapping herself in the blanket. She felt safe, not just physically but emotionally, as if the small acts of kindness Thomas had shown her had built a foundation of trust. She looked at him and offered a small, shy smile. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. Thomas nodded, returning the smile. "You don't have to thank me. Just being here is enough." The evening passed in a comfortable silence. They did not need to speak constantly. The shared presence was enough. The quiet moments, the crackle of the fire, the soft glow of the lamp, all contributed to a sense of peace that neither of them had felt in a long time. For Ayanna, it was a relief from fear and uncertainty. For Thomas, it was a reminder that even a quiet, lonely life could be touched by kindness and connection. Before they went to sleep, Ayanna spoke softly. "I didn't expect anyone to care." "Not really," she admitted. Thomas nodded, understanding completely. "Sometimes the world doesn't show its kindness right away," he said.
"But it's there, even in small ways, and we notice it when it matters most."
Ayanna smiled faintly, feeling a small hope stir in her heart. That night they both slept more peacefully than they had in a long time. Ayanna dreamed not of fear and storms, but of a quiet cabin warmth and the gentle presence of someone who cared. Thomas slept with a calm mind, knowing he had made a difference in someone's life, even if just for a short while. The bond between them, fragile yet real, had begun to form. A connection built on trust, care, and shared human experience. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of the cabin, warming the small room with soft golden light. Outside, the ranch looked peaceful, the earth still damp from the storm, the grass sparkling with droplets of water. Birds called softly to each other, and the gentle hum of the river could be heard in the distance. Inside, the cabin felt alive with warmth, not just from the fire, but from a sense of trust that had grown between Thomas and Ayanna. Ayanna had woken earlier than usual, her mind restless with thoughts she had kept buried for so long. She had slept peacefully, yes, but the calm had allowed her memories and worries to rise again. She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat by the fire, staring at the flickering flames. Thomas noticed her quiet reflection and sat nearby, not intruding, but offering silent company. There was comfort in having someone nearby who simply understood the value of presence, who did not ask questions until she was ready to answer. After a few moments, Ayanna spoke. Her voice was soft, tentative, yet filled with a quiet determination. I never thought I would find someone who would just listen," she admitted. Thomas nodded, his eyes gentle. "Sometimes we forget how important it is to simply hear someone," he replied. "We don't always need to fix things or offer advice. Just listening can't be enough." Ayanna smiled faintly, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had been carrying so much alone for so long, and for the first time in years, she felt that someone truly understood. The morning moved slowly as they shared the cabin in companionable silence. Thomas tended to the animals and chores while Ayanna watched and helped where she could. She found a quiet joy in simple tasks, gathering eggs from the coop, feeding the chickens, brushing the horses. Each task required attention and care, and the rhythm of work helped calm the turmoil in her mind. With every small accomplishment, she felt a little more confident, a little more rooted in the present. By midday, Thomas suggested they sit and talk. "If you want," he said gently, "we can share stories. Sometimes it helps to speak aloud the things that weigh on us." Ayanna hesitated at first, her eyes dropping to the floor. Sharing her life, her struggles, and the experiences that had brought her here seemed daunting. Yet the warmth in Thomas's eyes, the calm steadiness of his presence, gave her courage. Slowly, she nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. She began with small details, stories of her childhood in her village, memories of her family, and moments of laughter that had once been bright and carefree. Her words flowed cautiously at first, as if testing the waters, but as Thomas listened without interruption or judgment, her confidence grew. She spoke of the hardships she had faced, of leaving behind a life that had become too heavy, and of the fear that had driven her into the storm. Each story she told seemed to lighten the load she had carried alone, as though speaking aloud released some of the tension that had bound her for so long. Thomas listened quietly, nodding occasionally, asking gentle questions that encouraged her without pressuring her. He shared small pieces of his own life as well, tales of the ranch, of working long hours to maintain the land, and the quiet moments that had filled his years of solitude. He spoke of loss, too, of people he had cared for, and moments of loneliness that had shaped him. Ayana listened with fascination, realizing that even someone as strong and capable as Thomas had faced struggles and challenges, though they were different from her own. As they shared their stories, a bond began to grow, subtle but undeniable. It was not based on grand gestures or dramatic events, but on the quiet understanding that comes when two people see each other for who they truly are. Ayana realized that she had been guarded for so long because the world had taught her that trust was dangerous. But here, with Thomas, she felt that trust could be safe. She could allow herself to speak, to feel, to be vulnerable without fear of judgment. They spoke for hours, moving from memories of the past to hopes for the future. Ayana shared dreams she had once held but had set aside, believing they were impossible. Thomas encouraged her gently, reminding her that small steps could lead to great change and that hope was never wasted. The conversation was slow, deliberate, each word chosen carefully, but it was exactly what both of them needed. The storm had passed outside, but inside the cabin another kind of storm, the storm of fear, doubt, and loneliness, was gradually calming. At one point Ayana paused, looking out the window at the rolling hills. "I never thought I would feel safe again," she said quietly. Thomas placed a hand on hers briefly, a gesture of reassurance and solidarity. "You are safe," he said softly. "And you can be safe. It's not about the world around us, but about finding the places and people where safety exists." She nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire, a warmth that came from being understood and cared for. As the day wore on, they worked together on small projects around the ranch. They repaired a fence that had been damaged in the storm, carried firewood, and tended to the animals. Each task was a way to share time, to work side by side without the need for constant conversation, yet still feeling the connection grow. Ayana found herself laughing softly at Thomas's dry humor, and he smiled at the lightness returning to her face. The shared work became a bridge, connecting them through simple acts of cooperation and care. By evening, the cabin felt alive with the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. The fire burned brightly, casting warm shadows on the walls. Ayana sat near it, wrapped in a blanket, and Thomas brought her a cup of tea. They drank in silence for a few moments, the comfort of shared presence speaking louder than words. She felt a sense of belonging she had not known in years, a sense that even in the midst of hardship, people could care for one another in ways both simple and profound. Ayana spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel lighter today, like some of the weight I've carried is gone." Thomas nodded, understanding perfectly. "The world can be heavy," he said, "but sometimes all it takes is a little kindness, a little care to start lifting it." She smiled, a genuine smile this time, the kind that reached her eyes and warmed her heart. It was the first time in a long while that she felt truly seen and valued. As night fell, they prepared for bed, the cabin quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the occasional call of a distant owl. Ayana lay wrapped in her blanket, feeling safe in a way she had almost forgotten existed. Thomas checked on her one last time before turning in, giving her a reassuring nod. "Rest well," he said. "Tomorrow is another day and we'll face it together." She nodded, feeling a quiet hope stir within her. That night, Ayana dreamed not of storms or fear, but of a quiet place where she could rest, surrounded by warmth, trust, and care. She dreamed of a world where kindness existed even in unexpected places, where strangers could become allies, and where she could find strength in connection. Thomas, in his own sleep, felt a rare contentment, knowing that he had made a difference, offering not just shelter but understanding, not just food and warmth, but a sense of human connection that could heal wounds. By the next morning, their bond had grown stronger, quiet but undeniable. Ayanna felt courage returning, the storm of her emotions having passed enough to leave clarity in its wake. Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that even his quiet life could touch another's in meaningful ways. Together, they had navigated the aftermath of the storm, both outside and within, building a foundation of trust, understanding, and shared humanity. Morning arrived quietly over the ranch. The first light of the sun stretched slowly across the hills, painting everything in a soft golden glow. The storm from days before had passed, leaving the land fresh and shining. Dew clung to the grass, the river sparkled in the sunlight, and birds flitted across the sky. For the first time in a long while, the world felt calm and inviting. Inside the cabin, Ayanna woke with a sense of clarity and peace that she hadn't felt in years. She lay under the warm blanket, listening to the faint sounds of Thomas moving around the cabin. He was preparing breakfast, quietly going about his routine, the smell of fresh coffee and cooking filling the small space. Ayanna felt a quiet gratitude settle in her chest. She had come to this remote ranch drenched and desperate, frightened and exhausted, and yet here she was, safe, warm, and slowly learning to trust again. Thomas noticed her stirring and smiled softly. "Good morning," he said. "I made some breakfast. Sit, and we'll eat before you continue your journey." Ayanna smiled faintly, brushing her damp hair from her face. She felt nervous about leaving, but also knew that she had grown stronger during her stay. The cabin, the warmth, and Thomas's quiet kindness had given her a new sense of hope. They ate together, the morning light streaming through the windows, casting a soft glow over their simple meal. They spoke in gentle, easy words, not dwelling on the past too much, but acknowledging what had happened. Thomas did not push her to speak of her fears, nor did Ayanna force herself to share everything. Instead, they shared quiet moments, understanding each other through presence, gestures, and the small rhythm of daily life. After breakfast, Thomas helped her gather her belongings. Her small bundle felt lighter now, not just because she had less to carry, but because her heart felt lighter as well. She had found comfort, safety, and understanding, and though she would have to face the world again, she no longer felt as alone. Thomas walked with her to the door, giving her a reassuring look. "You're ready for what comes next," he said quietly. "You've already faced more than most people could imagine, and you've come through it." Ayanna felt a lump form in her throat. The words carried more than encouragement. They carried recognition, validation, and care. She had been walking through life weighed down by fear and sorrow, but in this small cabin, she had been seen, heard, and valued. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You didn't just give me shelter, you gave me hope." Thomas shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me. Sometimes we help because it's the right thing to do. That's all." There was a quiet honesty in his words that touched her deeply. She realized that true kindness did not need reward or recognition. It simply existed, and it could change someone's life in ways they never expected. Ayanna took a deep breath and looked around the cabin one last time. The walls, the fire, the simple furniture, all of it felt like a small sanctuary that had protected her from a storm both outside and inside herself. She had arrived at the ranch frightened, crying in the rain, and now she was leaving with courage, strength, and a sense of self-worth she had almost forgotten. Thomas walked with her to the edge of the field, the early sunlight catching the drops of dew on the grass. The river ran gently nearby, sparkling as if celebrating the calm after the storm. Ayanna felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. She did not want to leave the safety she had found, but she knew she had to continue her journey, carry her newfound strength into the wider world, and face life with the courage she had gained here. Before she stepped away, Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "Remember," he said, "you're stronger than you know." and you are never truly alone. There are people who care, even when you feel the world has forgotten you. Ayana nodded, holding back tears. She had been invisible to so many, but in Thomas's eyes, she had mattered. His words, simple yet powerful, had imprinted on her heart. She turned toward the road, feeling the weight of her small bundle on her shoulder but carrying it lightly, now that her spirit felt renewed. The sunlight touched her face, warm and comforting, and she breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. Every step forward felt lighter than before, each movement filled with newfound determination. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew she had the inner strength to face it. As she walked away, she looked back at the cabin, at Thomas standing at the door, a figure of quiet steadfastness and care. For a brief moment she felt a wave of emotion, gratitude, relief, and hope, all mingled together. She whispered softly, "Thank you truly." And he nodded, his eyes reflecting the same quiet understanding they had shared since the storm. Ayana continued walking, the ranch fading behind her, but the lessons and warmth she had received remained with her. She noticed the beauty of the world around her, the glistening fields, the flowing river, the distant mountains. Even though she had faced fear and despair, the world had not ended. There was kindness, hope, and connection, even in unexpected places. The storm had passed, and she felt prepared to face whatever came next. Meanwhile, Thomas returned to his cabin, quietly reflecting on what had happened. He had spent years in solitude, accustomed to the rhythm of his own life, but Ayana's presence had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten: the power of human connection, the impact of kindness, and the quiet joy of helping another person find their way. He moved about his chores with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that small actions, simple gestures, could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Days passed, and Ayana's journey continued. She faced challenges, of course, as life always did, but she carried within her the strength she had gained at the ranch. The memory of Thomas's quiet kindness, his reassurance, and the safety she had felt remained a source of courage. Whenever fear or doubt tried to creep back in, she would recall the warmth of the cabin, the fire, and the simple words, "You're safe." Those words had become a lifeline, a reminder that she could overcome obstacles with patience, courage, and trust. As weeks went by, Ayana found herself sharing her story with others, not to seek recognition but to remind herself and others that kindness could be found even in the most unexpected places. She realized that safety and care could be offered by strangers, that empathy could heal wounds, and that human connection was a gift to be cherished and nurtured. Every step she took carried the memory of the ranch and the rancher who had given her a safe space to breathe, reflect, and grow. Thomas, on the other hand, continued his quiet life on the ranch, but he too had been changed. The experience had reminded him of the importance of small gestures, of being present, and of offering kindness without expectation. He tended to his land and animals with the same diligence as always, but his heart felt fuller, lighter, warmed by the knowledge that he had made a difference in someone's life. He realized that even a solitary life could touch the lives of others, and that impact could be profound in its simplicity. Years later, Ayana would remember that stormy day with gratitude, not with sorrow. She would recall the rain falling on the fields, the fear that had gripped her, and the moment Thomas appeared offering warmth, shelter, and safety. She would remember the quiet cabin, the fire, and the conversations that had allowed her to trust and heal. And though she would continue to face hardships, she carried with her the knowledge that kindness existed, that safety could be found, and that one person's care could change another's life forever. And Thomas, living quietly on his ranch, would sometimes look out over the hills and remember the woman who had cried in the rain, who had trusted him when the world felt cruel. He would smile softly, knowing that his small acts of kindness had mattered, that human connection had bridged the distance between two lonely hearts, and that even in solitude, one could touch the life of another in the most profound ways. The story ends not with grand drama or sweeping gestures, but with a quiet sense of hope and warmth. Two people, strangers brought together by chance and circumstance, had found safety, trust, and understanding. The storm had passed, both outside and within, leaving them stronger, braver, and more aware of the gentle power of kindness. Life continued, with its challenges and joys, but both carried a renewed sense of hope and the knowledge that even in the loneliest moments, connection and care could be found.